It's a new year. It's actually not, it's March. I've decided I'm going to keep up the trend of going through all the books that I read throughout the year, and also the trend of posting them a month late. I'm sticking with the 2-month intervals because I simply do not read enough during a month. So we're going to be talking about the first 6 books that I read this year in January and February. Starting off strong with the classic, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This has been on my radar. I say that like it's not like it's not like a book that like someone tells you about when you're 20. I've obviously known about this book for a long time and I finally read it. Yes, this is a story about Dorian Gray, who is a very beautiful, well-established, youthful, rich man who is very well envied, and his friend, who's a painter, decides to do a painting of him. He's like his main muse because he's seen as genuinely the most like desirable person on the planet. Dorian's evil insides, his cruel nature, his malicious actions come out in this painting. So the painting starts to rot and become ugly and worn with age, whereas Dorian Gray stays young forever. He's completely unblemished by his actions or aging or anything. It is at its core a story about cruelty, the societal value of youth, the power that comes with youth, and status and wealth. Just generally, it's about a bunch of pretentious people being really fucking evil. This was a terrible explanation. Obviously, Dorian starts to be haunted by this painting, haunted by the hidden consequence of his own actions. It's about, you know, the value of beauty over kindness, etc, etc. It's very interesting. I did not sell it well. The writing in this book is magnificent. Like, I completely understand why it's considered to be a masterpiece. It didn't like hit like 5-star for me, but the writing was unbelievable. A lot of people I know didn't, just because the characters are genuinely insufferable. So just know that going into it, like, these are not good people. There's a lot of also like outdated ideas obviously, but it is mostly a satire, commentary. If you're into that sort of stuff, this is a really well written one. Just all these people are horrendous. Also, it is as homoerotic as one would assume. I was not disappointed in that department. Last year I briefly started this book. I got about halfway in, which is actually not that brief, because I really wanted to properly enjoy it and I wasn't in the YA fantasy mood anymore. And then I finished it in January and oh my god, legendborn. This book I feel like is a little bit infamous at this point. It's highly considered to be the YA fantasy, or maybe that's just what I consider it. This is a retelling kind of King Arthur. This is set in a college in America. Bree has recently lost her mother. She is dealing with a lot of grief. The talks of grief in this book are beautiful. And she ends up kind of getting entangled in a secret society at her university, which has some magical shit going on. It is, that part is kind of a retelling of the Order in the Round Table. There's basically a shit ton of monsters which are about to like break through into the like human realm. There's so much world building and so much like the magic system in here is very, very complex, very convoluted, so it's kind of hard to explain. But basically there's a threat and Bree ends up involved and is trying to figure out how to like be involved in this kind of King Arthur shit, but then also has her own like ancestral magic going on that no one else knows about, no one can know about, because she'd be considered to be like a demon. There's a lot. All I will say is that this book is magnificently written. As a YA, it is so, as I said, like complex, convoluted. There's such great conversations in here about like colonialism, as I said, grief. Oh my god, the talks of grief are so good. As someone who lost their mother at a young age also, she gets it. I felt like the first half I wasn't in it as much, and then the second half just blew me away. It's like constant, like you're just losing your mind. I would say that genuinely the only problem I have with this book, if you can call it that, is that there's a lot of different characters that kind of don't have any like discernible qualities. They're just kind of in the background. They're all very like interchangeable. Like I don't really remember what most of them really were. Like the difference is what their point in the story was. But I love the characters that were there. Oh my god, Sel! There's a little bit of a like, I wouldn't say love triangle, right? Because people don't really like love triangles. But there's definitely something going on. It's definitely very interesting. Read it. I'm very excited to read the second book in the duology, or it possibly is a trilogy. It's a trilogy, but it's not finished. There's 2 of them. And then I picked up Kindred by Octavia Butler. This is a kind of sci-fi historical fiction bit of a time traveling story about our protagonist who gets pulled back in time through a kind of ancestral bond. The son of the owner of a plantation, anytime he's in a near-death experience, like about to die, our protagonist gets pulled back in time to save him, because if she doesn't save him, her entire family line gets cut out. But she also can't get home on command, so she has to live in the 1800s basically as a slave. I feel like if this book was longer, I would have connected even more, but as it stands, for being a barely 300-page book, oh my god, you connect to the characters. She has such a complicated, complex relationship to this boy, Rufus, because he is essentially a slave owner and she is essentially a slave in this scenario, but they have such a complicated bond and it's so interesting to read about. All of the character dynamics in this are so interesting to read about and so like layered. This is very hard to read, as you can imagine, but so important and so impactful. It's just super gripping. I don't think I've read a book this fast in like a long time, or at least I hadn't at the time of reading this. I definitely see why Octavia Butler is a really popular author, and I'm excited to read more of her stuff because this was an excellent introduction. And then I went on a little trip to go to some concerts, so I was in the airport and all this stuff, so I wanted to bring something easy to read. So I decided to pick up the second Percy Jackson book, The Sea of Monsters. I was told by everyone that this one is the worst one and like I won't like it as much as the first one, and I didn't love the first one as much as I hoped to, so I was a little bit nervous. But I ended up enjoying this even more, and I think that it's just because of the like place I was in reading it. Like I think I just was more in the mood for like a YA quest, because the first one is probably objectively better, but I had a great old time. This was just fun. I feel like I was more connected to the characters. It's so easy to read, it's just entertaining, there's not that much to say. I'm gonna finish the series now. I didn't know if I was, but now I am invested. And it's fun. It's fun. I'm into Greek myth way more now. I don't know what's happened. In a huge juxtaposition, I then finished Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. This is essentially, as it sounds, a collection of letters that Rilke wrote to a young man seeking advice, and then they become kind of, I would say, pretty close companions through these letters throughout the years. So much talk in this, not just about being a writer and a poet, but about solitude, isolation, sexuality, our relationship to other people, honestly like processing sadness, living with sadness, using it to harness your writing. There is so much in here. This book honestly touched my soul. I was going through and underlining, you can't really tell, but I could have underlined genuinely like every other sentence in this book. It was so well written, just for being letters. Like it's not even prose essentially. There is a little bit of like outdated talk on specifically like female sexuality. This was written in like 1910, so I was not that shocked. There's like a few like really dodgy lines, but apart from that, generally felt quite progressive. It was very like self-aware of times are changing and you know we can keep up and not everyone's going to. I don't want to say I'm a writer, but I dabble and I love writing and reading and all of these things about written word, and this was such a love letter to the act of writing. It's one of those books that just hits you in your soul and really actually makes you reflect and all those things. Very pretentious, and this is very pretentious. If you can get into that, then you'll have a great old time. And lastly, I was listening to the audiobook, which I rarely ever do because I don't have the auditory processing abilities for that, but I was listening to No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, which is essentially, it's a fiction, but like I think pretty loosely based on Patricia Lockwood's experiences. Basically about our relationship to the internet, about being a bit chronically online, the political landscape online, kind of like how our brains are being completely like redeveloped by our relationship to the internet, the way we connect to others is being changed, and all of those horrifying things. I started off really loving this. I think the writing is really, really good. There were like so many lines and parts that I just deeply related to and thought this is written in the way that my brain works. But there was also a lot that was a little bit questionable, like especially talking about like the kind of political stuff and almost like the kind of like cancel culture things and how that gets into your head, and you know, our relationship to being perceived on a wider scale and our mistakes or broadcasts and stuff like that. It's very interesting, but there were a lot of moments where I was like, this feels a little bit out of touch, or like a very privileged, like very white woman perspective on everything. I would definitely keep that in mind if you're going into this book, but I didn't think it was really interesting, and I think it takes like a dramatic turn, I guess, like maybe halfway or in the later bit of the book. It kind of isn't really about that anymore. It's about how she relates her real life problems with these huge dramatic problems she was having on the internet, or what felt like huge problems on the internet. I just didn't connect as much to those later parts. I more just enjoyed when it was kind of a like, we're both in this together, we're both aware that the internet is a horrible thing for us, but we're indulging. I feel like it got a little bit more preachy towards the end, but I do think overall I really recommend it if you're interested in stuff like that. I thought it felt kind of similarly to like the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green or something like that. Definitely preferred the Anthropocene Reviewed by like a million miles, and I felt like that didn't have the maybe borderline problematic parts that this did, but I got this in the library, so I'm not mad about it, and I think if it's on your library, give it a shot if you want. But yeah, those are all of the books that I read in January, February. I kind of had a slow start to the year, but that's fine. Let me know your favourite book you've read so far this year. I don't know why I'm acting like I have an audience on here. Frankie and Kian, hi, how you doing? But yeah, I haven't set a reading goal for this year. I've decided that I'm just going to read books and not count them, because that can't be good for you either. While we're talking about the internet and how it impacts our relationship to consuming media, I could get into that, but I won't. But yeah, have a good night, a good week. I hope you enjoyed, and honestly, I recommend all of these books, so a win. But mostly Legendborn.